Hey guys, hope you're having a great day. Tim back in the Revolved Realty studio. Got a very special guest today on the program. And by very special, I mean one of our own, Ben Wright with Revolved Realty. How are you, Ben?
I'm great. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing good. Ben is our man in the Shoals. And we're very excited to have a man in the Shoals. So appreciate you being there. Couple of things I want to talk about. Number one is your background. We want to talk a little bit about how you got into real estate, but then we also want to talk about what you do. Your main focus is on investment property. You're doing a lot of investing yourself. You just bought a big package of houses that we want to talk about. So, hey, before we get started, just tell the folks a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Florence, Alabama. I lived here for practically my whole life. I got a wife and two kids. Both sets of parents live here. So Florence has kind of always been home for us. And back about a year ago, back about 2 years ago, we moved up north, kind of took a corporate job, moved up to Illinois. Didn't really like it there. It was kind of a dead end situation. And so about a year ago, that's when we made the decision to kind of leave the nest of the W-2 job and kind of break out on our own. And so got started in real estate investing about 11 months ago. So I got my realtor license. So I'm operating as a realtor. But as you mentioned, I'm focusing a lot of my efforts on real estate investing and look forward to talking about that.
What kind of work were you doing before?
I was working for a grocery store. Aldi was the name. Mm-hmm. So I was working here locally as a district manager.
Okay.
Kind of in the field with employees, and then moved up there in a kind of a sit behind a desk corporate role.
You don't impress me as a sit behind the desk kind of guy.
Yeah, for anybody that knows me, I think my energy level doesn't really tolerate desks very well. Yeah. I hope I make it through this interview, to be honest.
No, you'll be fine. You're doing great. Hey, you're good looking. You smile. You sound good. So, well, what got you interested in real estate? Did you have any background in that, or how'd you get into that?
Well, I really didn't have any background. I really just started listening to a bunch of podcasts, reading a bunch of books, and just realizing the opportunities that were there, regardless of where you are. Some of the benefits really stood out to me about, hey, you can invest, you can be a realtor and help people in any location. You know, every city has houses and apartments, and and also there's what's interesting about it is, to me, is there's tons of different ways to do it. Everybody does things a little bit differently. I have my way of doing things, and there's several different methods of investing that you can do. So that's what stood out to me was, hey, there's a lot of different opportunities available. And I just kind of got started and tried a couple different things. And over the past 11 months, I've kind of figured out what I like doing and what I don't like doing.
Now, what did your wife say when you came to her and said, honey, we're going to move back south? I'm going to quit this good paying corporate job and I'm going to go into real estate. What was that conversation like?
Well, it was weird. She said, well, I want to move back south. Mm-hmm. Great. But I also like eating and having shelter. So, and clothing for our children. So, once we figured out that we could make that work, we just said, well, let's just figure it out, and we'll figure the rest out as we go.
Yeah, you impressed me as being a real numbers guy. Did you crunch those numbers until they squealed?
I did. So I'm not really good at a lot of things, but numbers, I think, is one of the things I'm better at. And we ran some numbers on, how much money we had to live off of for a while, and how much we could spend buying a couple houses here and what that would do for us. And once we knew we could get by for 6 months or so, I said, well, I'll just have to start making some stuff happen before that money runs out.
Yeah, and you've really done a lot in the last year. How did you start educating yourself on rentals? Because you buy and hold, you flip, you do a little bit of all of it. Tell me about your education in the last year, learning how to do that.
Yeah, so it started, I guess, probably a year and a half ago. Before I took 6 to 7 months before I resigned my corporate position. Just reading, doing a lot of listening to podcasts. Bigger Pockets is the most popular one.
Sure.
A lot of people listen to that one. And then once you kind of hear some different investors on there talk about what they do, that's when I kind of took some books and read, okay, what do the numbers really need to look like on a rental, and how can I pull all of my cash back out after buying a rental? That was really the turning point that gave me the confidence to be able to do this. I thought, like most people think, is that, well, if you're going to own apartments, you've got to have millions of dollars and just buy them all, and then you can sit on the beach and relax from there. Unfortunately, that was not me, and still is not me, and won't be me for a long time.
Yeah.
But what I figured out is that you can buy properties, you can rehab them, and then you can go to the bank and pull virtually all of your money back out and continue doing that process and build up wealth throughout.
Yeah, and that's one thing we're going to talk about, because you think you've used the Burr method quite a bit to do that. Tell me about your first deal.
So first deal was on a duplex. I still own that duplex. So bought the duplex for $38,000, paid cash for it. I put $7,000 into it, a lot of my own work, a lot of my own labor, just to save every penny that I could. Now we're kind of to the point to where we'd like to contract that out and keep moving on some other projects. But first deal, so my all-in cost was $45,000 after retail value, or after rehab value on that property is about $60,000. I still haven't refinanced that particular one yet. But that's a good example to where if I took that $60,000 property to the bank today, I was actually filling out an application earlier today. So they'd be able to give me 80% of of the value of what that house is worth. So if I'm doing my math right, they'd give me $48,000 back for that property. So that would be enough to cover my all-in cost plus any holding costs I had on interest loans or any closing fees or anything like that. And then I can take that money and go work on another project.
And how did you find that property?
That one was actually on the MLS. These days, there's not a lot of good deals on the MLS because, as everybody knows, the market is so hot. Most of the deals that I have found have been off the MLS. But this particular one is being marketed as a single-family house. And it actually had a basement that was not really being used. And so that's where we spent most of our rehab budget. So we kind of converted that property from a single family house into a duplex, and that's how we raised the value on it pretty quick.
Is this in Florence?
It is in Florence, yes.
Yeah. What kind of rent are you getting?
So I'm getting $1,000 a month between the two units, $600 on the top, $400 on the bottom. So those numbers work out really well. I've had a lot of bad deals since I first started, but surprisingly, the first one that I did was a pretty good one. The numbers that I use is that you want your rent to be at least 1.5% of what you pay for the property. So with my all-in cost being $45,000 for that property, my monthly rent is actually over 2% what the all-in cost is of that property.
Yeah, they're in Florence. What's the average rent running over there?
Well, it depends. A lot of what I invest in is a lot of even though that's a duplex, I do a lot of single family houses. So it could be anywhere from 5, 6. I've got one property that's at 950. It's not just in home sales, but it's in rentals as well. Location is key. So in a good quiet neighborhood, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, you can get $900 to $1,000 for. In a different area, a mostly rental area, a 2-bed, 1-bath type house is a $500 to $600 type range.
You and I were talking the other day about right there where you are. You've got Florence, Sheffield, Tuscumbia. Is there a big difference between those areas as far as property values and rent values and that sort of thing?
Yes, property values for sure. Muscle Shoals has really taken off in the past couple of years. The school systems is really what drives property values, as we all know. So school systems in Florence and Muscle Shoals are really, really strong. So the property values there are pretty high. Sheffield is the deal we'll talk about here in a little bit. That's where I purchased a lot of houses in Sheffield. The rental rates are not quite as high as they would be in Florence, Muscle Shoals, or Tuscumbia, because a lot of Sheffield is rental territory. But what's good about Sheffield is the values are significantly less. The purchase price is significantly less. Therefore, you can still find good houses with good roofs, good HVAC system on a good street. It's just going to be a better rental market than it is for a flip or somebody that wants to stay long term.
Yeah. Do you know what the ratio of ownership versus rentals are over there? Like in Decatur, for example, the last statistics I saw, something like 50% of homes were rentals as opposed to ownership.
I gotcha.
So
yeah, I'm not aware of that statistic. So I'm just kind of figuring stuff out as I go. That's one that I'll add to my list of a metric to keep in mind. But Sheffield is definitely a lot higher than Florence and Muscle Shoals would be.
I know that Chelsea and her mother, who's an investor, they do a lot of deals in Decatur. And it's simply because the rental market there is so much higher than it is here.
Correct. How
did you finance that first deal? You said you bought it for 38, I think, for cash. Where did that cash come from?
So we had a decent bit of rainy day funds set aside. So I've always been a saver, and so when we quit our job, we actually sold everything. We sold our house. We sold all of our furniture. We moved in with my in-laws, Sarah Leslie, my wife.
Boy, you were dedicated, weren't you?
Yeah, we were. Yeah, we bit the bullet and we jumped all in. So yeah, we sold practically everything we owned, and from that point forward, I was able to buy 3 or 4 houses with that amount of money. Mm-hmm. And then once we ran out of that money, then started using family lines of credit to
other people's money
from there.
Yeah.
Other people's money. Yes.
Talk a little bit about talk a little bit about the fear factor. When you first started doing this and you were thinking about doing this, was there any trepidation at all, or were you just that confident that you were going to pull this off?
I would love to say I was that confident and I could see into the future and know everything was going to be okay. But really what I've realized over the past 2 years are that successful people are not people that are really just born with ambition or confidence, because those things wane. But successful people are people that know how to identify their fears and overcome them. And it's not an easy pep talk you just give yourself. It's weeks and months of thinking and rationalizing with yourself, and that's really what it all comes down to. Is fears are what hold us back from what we really want to do. And I haven't really overcome all my fears. There's still tons of fears that I have, and some things I know I need to get into, but haven't done yet because I've still got that fear level. So it's just a constant battle of overcoming fears on a day-to-day basis.
One of the things that impressed me about you when we first met was I could tell you are an entrepreneur. You've got that spirit and that drive and that, my dad told me once, boy, you're too dumb to quit. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take that as a compliment because, and I see a lot of that, not that you're dumb, but you overcome that fear. Now, here we are just like a year later. And I know you do, one of the things I said, if I asked you what you do now, you said, I specialize in finding the best use or maximum value for each property. Talk a little bit about that, because a lot of the folks that watch this show, we're real active in the local RIAs and the investment groups. Mm-hmm. And I get that question a lot is, how do I get started? What should I do? How do I gauge each deal to make sure it's the best thing? And is it better to rent? Is it better to flip? So talk a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. So I guess where all that came from is, I bought 3 or 4 houses and I said, okay, we're out of money. I need to make every penny that I can on each of these in order to, keep everything going. Mm-hmm. So that's really where it all started. And there's really not a magic formula that I use for anything, but there's a lot of factors to associate with each property. I will flip some properties. So if I can't reach that 1.5% rental mark, then that's when I look and say, okay, can I flip this property and make money? So for instance, if there's a house that I think my all-in costs are going to be $100,000 on, but I can only rent it for $900 or $1,000. Well, that to me doesn't make me, and that doesn't make sense to me as a rental. So I'll look at, okay, what can I do now? Can I flip this house to make an appropriate profit? So that's an option. Another thing I like to do are lease option deals. So what I could do in a situation is let's say I had $100,000 house. I could, if the market value on that house is, let's say 120,000, well, then I could take that property and I could find what we call a tenant buyer. And a tenant buyer, I would say, hey, you may not have the credit to be able to buy this $120,000 house today. What I can do, you could put 10% down, and then you can buy this property at any point over the next 5-7 years, whatever timeline we decide on. And then they provide a rental amount at that point. So while the market rent may be $1,000, might be able to charge a little bit more because I'm giving them the opportunity to buy the house. So maybe $1,050 or $1,100. Still doesn't make sense as a rental. However, I'm not just generating monthly rental income. I've also got the back end revenue of whenever this house does sell. I'll have those back end profits as well.
Right. I think that's one of the key things is to be flexible on this, because I know some investors who are so rigid they won't buy a buy and hold property unless it meets this particular formula. But not every house is going to make that formula, so I think that's smart. Let's talk a little bit about the deal that you just completed, which this one scares me. So, tell us about
That's
this
what I was
deal.
talking about. Several months of getting over fears.
Yeah. So talk about it. How did you happen upon this? What did it consist of, and how did you pull it off?
Yeah. So this is kind of what I was talking about with flexibility. I actually created a list. I pulled a list from listsource.com of all the property managers, property owners in the Florence, Muscle Shoals, Lauderdale, and Colbert County area. Okay. I was looking for apartments because in order to scale faster, buying 1 or 2 houses at a time is good, and I still do that, but I was really looking to scale a little bit quicker. So I was looking for apartment buildings. So what I did was I pulled that list of all property owners that didn't have their property in an LLC. So really what I was looking for was kind of a mom and pop owner that, just kind of self-managed for many years and maybe wasn't getting the appropriate amount of value out of their property as they could. They weren't really maximizing the value. And so I sent out direct mail. It took me 6 rounds of direct mail. So I hand wrote letters, then made copies, and to where it made it look like they were all handwritten. I also like being efficient as well. So sent out about 150 letters. I got a couple nibbles here and there. I bought a 4-unit apartment complex.
What did these letters say?
Okay. Yeah. So the letters essentially said, hey, I'm a local guy. I'm a real estate investor in this area. I'm not, I'm not trying to take your property and flip it. I'm not trying to list your property as a realtor and make a commission. I'm trying to buy your property for a fair price, for what you think is fair. And I can close quickly. I can be flexible. I can essentially the message I was trying to convey is I can be whatever you need me to be. And that's really what I try to communicate to anybody that's selling their house. I can get you top dollar and stretch out the closing process, or, if you need to sell fast. There was a 4-unit apartment complex that was in really rough shape. And, I made him an offer and said, I can close in 7 days. And he said, okay, that's good for me because I got some bills I need to pay next month.
Mm-hmm.
So it's different things resonate with sellers. And that's what I found out as well. Not everybody's looking for the top price. Everybody's looking for something different. So I sent out about 5 or 6 different rounds. And then finally, I caught a couple small deals along the way. And then finally the big one hit. It was about 35 houses and a couple apartment complexes.
Wow.
So
35 houses and 2 apartment complexes owned by one guy.
Owned by one guy.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was just kind of a lifelong real estate investor, had the properties, accumulated them over the years, and then was just ready to get out. Not really exactly sure the situation that happened, but for whatever reason, my note hit him at the right time, and he said, I'm ready to sell everything, even if it's at a slight discount.
And what was his price to sell everything?
The price we agreed upon was $930,000. But the interesting part is, we were negotiating for probably 2 months. It took, we went back and forth on several different things. We had a price, and then, I went and looked at some of the properties in more detail. And then, he agreed to fix a couple things, and he agreed to let me use his warehouse for a year. And then there were several different things that we did there. And then we, eventually came to a deal.
Let's talk a little bit about these properties. I assume that for $930,000, would you say there were 35 houses?
Yes, 35 houses.
4 buildings, 4 apartment buildings. Talk a little bit about the condition of these properties.
They range. It was a pretty wide range. So there's 2 houses in Muscle Shoals that are pretty valuable, 3-bed, 2-bath, your standard 1,500 square foot, $100 a square foot house.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's there's 8 houses that are uninhabitable and have been vacant for decades even. And I've actually listed a couple of those houses. One went under contract yesterday.
Yeah, my phone was blowing up yesterday.
Yeah.
And everybody was calling me up, hey, I'm calling about these houses over here. And I'm like, that damn Ben. And they were those 3 houses. I mean, people were really, really wanting to know more about those. So It kind of ran the gamut, but there were a few that really had just been neglected to the point of, I don't want to say they were condemnable, but they really needed some work to be inhabited.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And so those needed a lot of work. I don't have the time to tackle all the projects I have on my plate right now. So sometimes it's the best thing to say, hey, I'm going to take whatever this property is worth, and I'm going to sell it to another investor who might make 20 grand on it.
Right.
Just to be able to get that cash and be able to proceed going forward.
Okay. So you put this deal together, $930,000. How did you finance it?
So financed it through a bank. I had family and friends that were willing to come up with the down payment with me, and then had some help signing on the note as well. So what I call this is a portfolio deal.
Mm-hmm.
You're buying somebody's entire portfolio.
Right.
The fun part to me about this is being able to puzzle piece everything in terms of what properties are worth. I really don't love rehabbing properties. It's a necessary evil in my opinion. I enjoy buying and selling properties, and I enjoy kind of working with banks and my accountant to see, okay, what's the best way to do things. So anyways, the way that we structured it with the bank is the bank didn't take every single property on the note. There were several properties that were left off of the note.
Is that because there was no value there?
Right. So the 8 vacant houses were not put on the note, as well as a couple of the other houses. I was able to work it out with the bank. Once again, in real estate, everything's a negotiation. So had to go back and forth several times with the bank. but was able to finally come to a deal where they would let me keep a certain amount of properties off of the loan because the other, let's say, 25 houses plus apartments were able to float the loan at the 80% loan to value that they needed based on where they appraised.
Right. Because those houses that were decrepit, I mean, honestly, there may be some land value there, but there's not a lot of house value.
Not a lot of house value, but they can still sell for something, you know.
Yeah.
So
probably mid-teens, mid to high teens.
Yeah, I listed the one that went under contract yesterday. Went under contract for 17,500. So, so pretty good. Not a ton. It's based on the house. It's like $5 or $6 a square foot. You were joking with me about that. You're like, I've never seen that in Madison, but in Sheffield, there's a couple houses for $5 or $6 a square foot.
So did you go to what bank did you use?
So I used a credit union, Lister Hill Credit Union. Yeah. So there's pros and cons to every bank. I was able to get a pretty good rate and use Lister Hill Credit Union. So kind of where I am now is the fun part, in my opinion, is because I get to take these properties and the properties that the bank didn't take as collateral. Well, when I sell those, I get to keep all the proceeds. There's nothing that I owe to the bank.
Right.
So I could just go blow all that money, which is not really my style. Yeah. Or I could pay off my investors, those that helped me put the down payment together. And then over the next 6 months or so, I should be able to sell off enough properties to pay that down payment off.
And how much was that down payment?
Let's see, I guess a little under $200,000. So 175, 180.
Nice chunk of change. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the even funner part to me is juggling the bank side as well as the tax side of things. So on a deal this big, one thing that I've learned throughout the process is that you can assign each house, which when there's 35 houses, there's a lot of value to be assigned with each house. So you could assign each house a value with your accountant. And then depending on what that house sells for is what you have to pay taxes on. So if I've got a house that, let's say I sell for $100,000 and I say, okay, well, the tax basis on this house is $100,000. I've only got $930 to spread around all the houses. But if I make some of the houses a little bit lower, some of them a little bit higher, as long as they're reasonable and within range, I could sell this house for $100,000. Even though I may have only paid, let's say, $50,000 for it, when you calculate everything, well, my tax basis on it is $100,000. So the bank doesn't require any money to be paid back to them. The government doesn't require any money because in their eyes, I sold this house for exactly what I paid for it. And therefore, I can take that money tax-free and then reinvest it without paying any taxes or paying back the bank.
Yeah, that's nice. So was there an appraisal process at all? Did they come in and do individual houses, or what did they do?
Yeah, so I learned a pretty good lesson. I was talking to my loan officer, and he said, "Yeah, appraisals are about $350 to $400 per house." And I was running those numbers and thinking, "Wow, that is very expensive, and I don't want to have to pay that." And I said, "Are there any other options?" And he said, "Well, we can do desktop appraisals, where we just, run a CMA." Competitive market analysis on our computers. We can do desktop appraisals for $20 per property.
Sounds like a fine idea.
I said, "Yeah, let's do that." And he said, "Well, we can only do that if the deal is less than $250,000. I said, "Well, what if we do 4 different deals? We break it out into 4 different contracts, 4 different deals." And he said, "Let me talk to somebody, but I think that'll work." And then that's what we did. And that alone was able to save several $1,000s.
Very cool. Was this a 30-year term, or what were your terms on paying this off?
So 20-year amortization. Standard for a commercial loan is a 20-year am with a 5-year balloon. Doesn't mean you have to repay that back at 5 years. It just means, hey, at the end of 5 years, I was locked into a 4.5% interest rate, which people that are hearing this may say, oh, I've heard interest rates are as low as 3%. Well, that's true on the residential side.
Mm-hmm. Right.
On a commercial loan, you really can't get a 30-year loan, at least where I am in my career. A 15-year amortization is standard with a 5-year balloon, which means at the end of 5 years, depending on where interest rates are at the time, the bank will want to either refinance all of the properties or readjust to a more market value interest rate at that time.
Yeah. Are you doing interest-only payments?
No, I'm paying back principal as well. So paying back principal, I do interest only if I could, but on this particular deal, needed to repay some principal. So and 5-year balloons are not a bad thing for those that are looking to invest in real estate. A number that you need to track when you're investing in real estate is your return on your equity, not just your return on investment. So return on investment would be, okay, I bought this $100,000 house. I paid a $20,000 down payment, and my cash flow, everything that I'm earning at the end of the year is $2,000. So my return on investment is 10%. Well, 5 years from now, your equity in the house might be $30,000 because you've paid down some of your principal. So your return on equity at that point is, I don't know, what is that, 7.5%? I'm not sure what that would be, but it's not very good. So you would want to refinance that property at that point. So really 5 years is kind of your sweet spot for if you're in the growing mode, which I am and probably will be for a very long time. 5 years is kind of your sweet spot for, okay, after I've paid down the property, I really need to refinance this money, pull it out, sink it into some other deals.
Right. So here you are, young man with an empire of 30 some houses, apartment buildings.
And responsibility.
Yeah, you are welcome to America. You're up to your ass in debt. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah. So what's your plan now? A couple of these houses are nice. Are they rented out? You got to do some work on these. What's your plan?
Luckily, a lot of it was turnkey. I was really able to buy his business of, hey, 25 of these houses are occupied. 8 out of the 11 apartments are occupied. And so, there was an office manager, a full-time maintenance person in place. There was a warehouse and office building, trucks and equipment. So we worked all that into the price to where I was.
So you basically bought his business.
I basically bought his business, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So by doing that, I was able to really just kind of jump in and take over things business as usual. You had
cash flow immediately.
But once again, the fear never subsides. A week after I closed on that deal, the coronavirus hit and the states were shut down. And I thought, oh crap, who's going to be able to pay me rent?
Nothing like timing.
$1 million in debt right now. So,
Well, talk a little bit about that. What has the coronavirus done to this deal? I mean, have you collected rents for April? What's it look like?
Yeah, so I've been pleasantly surprised. Talked to a lot of people about really what to expect, and kind of the consensus that I came to was people were looking to collect on approximately 80% of whatever is normal. Well, I don't really know what was normal for this business because I just bought it. I don't know if 80%, 90%, 95% was his standard collection rate. So I really didn't have anything to run those numbers based off of. But as of today, we've collected 81% of March rent.
That's pretty good.
Thrilled about.
Yeah.
55% is what we needed to pay all bills, insurance, property tax, and to pay the bank note and to pay all salaries. So 55% is what we needed to stay afloat. And luckily we were able to go well above that. And I think we'll finish in the 90 to 95 range by the end of this month.
It's pretty good.
So what we decided to do was just work with people. Because it's really not fair for me as a landlord to say, hey, I expect your rent no matter what. I didn't think that was fair, but also at the same time, it's not fair to me to
Correct.
somebody say, hey, I didn't lose my job, but I just, want somebody to give me a free pass for a couple months.
Yeah.
So what we decided to do was if any tenant could show documentation of where they lost their job within the past month or had reduced hours, we would waive late fees, we would work with them, and we'd set up a payment plan. And so that was kind of tailored person by person for whatever worked best for them. And that's really worked pretty good for us throughout this process.
Cool. How much work do these properties need?
Well, like I said, 25 of the houses were already occupied.
That's great.
There's 8 that really need a ton of work, and I'm probably just going to sell all of those off over the next 6 months. There's a couple in Muscle Shoals that are pretty valuable, and so I'll probably sell those via the MLS, or if I can't get the price that I think is fair for those, I might do a lease option like we talked about earlier, where I put a tenant in there. They rent the property from me until they're ready to buy it for the purchase price that I think is fair. So yeah, most of the properties were occupied. I did inherit a few more projects. There's 3 or 4 houses in this deal that I will flip over the next few months, but most of which I'll hold as rentals.
Yeah. I got to tell you, young man, that's pretty impressive. You overcame that fear really well. So what was the hardest part of this deal? Was it the putting together the financing, dealing with the bank, dealing with the seller? What was not fun?
Well, I would say the most difficult part is the dealing with the bank, structuring the loan, working on the financing side of things. The good thing for me is that's the part that I enjoy. The negotiations with the seller, that was difficult as well. But once again, that's a process that I enjoy. So that's really what I found in this industry is don't necessarily avoid what's hard, avoid what you don't like to do.
It's all hard. It's all
hard. Yeah. So I enjoy those hard things, but I don't enjoy being a property manager. I don't enjoy calling and collecting rent. So I have somebody that's really good at that, that I'm able to pay to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's excellent. I think that's a smart thing to do. I have great respect for people that can manage properties because I can't. I mean, I have one rental and I have a property manager. So, all right. So going forward here, are you looking for the next property? You still doing investing?
Yes. So I haven't sent out a big wave of direct mail because I'm not really ready to take down a big property like that. But,
you got your hands full.
Since closing that deal, I have bought another property or 2. And so I'm always looking to buy a couple properties here or there, whether it's as a flip or as a rental. And that's, once again, that's really kind of what I specialize in. I do my own marketing, but then when I sit down with the seller, instead of me saying, well, here's what I need to do and here's what fits me, I'm able to talk to them and say, what do you want? Here's your options. We can list your house. I'm a realtor. I can list your house via the MLS. I'm with Revolved Realty. We've got a great flat fee model where you'll save money on commissions and pay lower commissions than you would with your standard brokerage. So we can list your house. It might take a couple months to sell. You might need to fix these 2 things here or there, but that's how you'll get the most money for your house. I can pay you cash, which will be a less amount, but I can close in 7 to 10 days. You can be on your way. Or there's even more creative things to do. There's probably the most creative thing I've done so far is what's called a sandwich lease option. So I sat down with, it was actually not my client. It was a client of a friend of mine in our brokerage and a fellow realtor in our brokerage. And they just couldn't sell their house for what it was worth. They bought it 5 years ago at a certain price, couldn't sell it for that price. It was kind of weird, had a really steep driveway and a very small backyard. It was a really good house. But when people have options, they just didn't choose that house for certain reasons. so they said, well, what can you do? And I said, well, you've already had it listed on the MLS for several months. You haven't sold it at the purchase price that you wanted. I think their purchase price was around, what they were asking was around $150,000, we'll say. They weren't able to sell it for that. They weren't willing to come down off of that price to move the property. I said, well, I really can't buy your house with cash because I would have to buy it at a discount, which would be even less than what you would get it sold for via the MLS. So what we were able to work out is I said, well, would you be open to renting the property? And everybody's first reaction is, well, yes, but I'd love the income, but I don't want somebody tearing my house up. And I said, well, what if I could be the perfect tenant? I hope that didn't sound pretentious to them, but I said, I will, what's your mortgage? What's your taxes? What's your insurance? So they came to me and they said, okay, here's how much we pay a month for this house. I said, okay, what if we sign these papers? I will rent this house from you, me personally. I won't be the one living here, but I'll give you 12 post-dated checks for this amount. They're good. Here's my bank statement to where you can cash them. You're not responsible for any repairs, any maintenance, any rent collection. And then I'll sell your house for $150,000. And they said, awesome, that sounds great. What's the catch? And I said, the catch is that the house stays in your name while I put a tenant buyer until they're ready to buy the house. Well, that wasn't an issue for these clients because they were in a situation where they could go ahead and buy another house. They really just needed the monthly payments off of their back. So I was able to essentially lease their house from them. And then I went and marketed through my networks for what we call a tenant buyer. So this tenant buyer moves in. They're responsible for paying maintenance, utilities, all those things. I collect rent from them at an increase from what I'm paying out. So I make a little bit of money. And then at the back end, they agreed to buy the house for a purchase price slightly higher than what the seller was wanting to sell their property for. And so I make a little bit of money on the back end there as well. So I know that was kind of complicated and I probably even missed some parts there, but essentially what you needed to know is the seller was in a position where they really didn't have any options. And I gave them one that was great, that really worked for their situation.
Yeah. You solved their problem.
Yeah. I'm able to make a little bit of money per month off of that property. And then the tenant buyer that I sold it to didn't really have the credit to where they could move into their dream house at the time, but they move in today, 2 or 3 years later, they're able to buy the house with the standard bank note and take over a mortgage from there, but they're able to move in today to their dream house.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of creative things you can do out there. So, hey, Ben, we're going to cut it off here. You are our guy in the Shoals. You are our guy? You is our guy? Hey, you're my man.
I don't know.
In the Shoals. You know what? The older I get, the more creative I get with the language.
Numbers, not words.
Yeah. You are our Revolved agent in the Shoals. And if someone wants to list a house or get your help in finding a house, whatever, tell us how to get in touch with you.
So my email address is ben@revolved.com. I'll even give out my cell phone number, 256-710-8978. Just give me a call, text, or an email, any way that I can help you. I can find a way to help just about anybody, depending on what you want to do and how you want to do it. So just give me a call. I'd love to tell you what your options are and to help you any way I can.
Good deal. So if you are in the Shoals and you want to talk to Ben and learn more about what he does or what we can do for you here at Revolved, just give Ben a call. You can also go to the website, revolved.com. Hey, Ben, this has been fun, man. I get tired just listening to you because you're...
So does my wife.
I didn't mean that in a bad way. So, all right, guys. Hey, Ben, appreciate you, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
All right.